The date was December 16, 1985. The location was 46th Street, Midtown Manhattan. In the world of the five families, this was supposed to be the golden era. The commission was in place, the money was flowing, and the hierarchy was respected. But beneath the surface of the Gambino Crime Family, the largest and most feared criminal organization in the Western world, a terminal infection was spreading. At exactly 5:26 p.m., a black Lincoln Town car pulled to the curb in front of Sparks Steakhouse. Inside was Paul Castellano, the boss of bosses. He was 70 years old, a man who viewed himself more as a CEO than a gangster. He didn't have a gun. He didn't even have a real bodyguard. He had Thomas Bilotti, a man he had recently promoted to underboss, a promotion that acted as a slap in the face to every street soldier in Brooklyn. As the car door opened, the cold December air rushed in, but it was met with something much colder. Four men, dressed in identical tan trench coats and Russian fur hats, stepped out from the Christmas crowds. They didn't say a word. They didn't ask for money. They simply raised their weapons and opened fire. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. It was a declaration of war from the street against the suite. It was the moment the Gambino family decided that their own father had to die so that the sons could eat. Tonight, we enter the vault to answer the most dangerous question in Mafia history. Why did the Gambino family turn on their own? To understand the hatred that led to the sidewalk at Sparks, we have to look at the man in the mansion. Paul Castellano was never supposed to be the boss. When the legendary Carlo Gambino was dying in 1976, everyone expected him to name Aniello Delacroce, a rugged, street-tough warrior, as his successor. Instead, Carlo chose his cousin, Paul. It was a choice that split the family down the middle from day one. Paul Castellano was white-collar. He didn't come from the docks or the garment district. He was a man of numbers. He lived in a 17-room mansion on Staten Island that the neighbors called the White House. It sat on a hill, behind massive iron gates, isolated from the very men who were out in the cold earning his kick-up money. Castellano viewed the Mafia as a corporation. He spent his days meeting with labor union leaders and billionaire construction magnates. He wanted to move the mob into legitimate industries, concrete, garbage hauling, and the poultry business. He was a man who preferred a subpoena over a snub-nosed .38. But there was a problem. While Paul was sipping fine wine and talking to lawyers, his soldiers were in the social clubs of Ozone Park in East New York, feeling neglected. He was raising the tax they had to pay him, while refusing to even sit down and have a meal with them. He was a king who had forgotten the smell of the streets. And in the Mafia, if you don't smell the streets, you don't see the knife coming. While the Pope sat on his hill in Staten Island, a storm was brewing in Queens. At the Burgeon Hunt and Fish Club, a young, charismatic captain named John Gotti was building his own empire. Gotti was the opposite of Castellano. He was loud. He was flashy. He wore $2,000 Brioni suits and hand-painted silk ties. He was a blue-collar hero to the soldiers because he was one of them. But Gotti had a secret that could get him killed. Narrator. Castellano had a strictly enforced rule: no narcotics. He knew that the FBI prioritized drug cases above all else. He knew that a drug conviction meant a mandatory 20-year sentence, and he knew that 20 years was long enough to turn a tough mobster into a government witness. His rule was simple: deal dope, and you die. Gotti's crew, led by his brother Gene and his close friend Angelo Ruggiero, ignored the rule. They were moving kilos of heroin, fueled by a level of greed that construction kickbacks couldn't satisfy. They thought they were being careful, but they weren't. The FBI had bugged Ruggiero's house. They had hundreds of hours of tapes that talked about drug deals, and tapes that talked about how much they hated Paul Castellano. In 1985, the legal walls began to close in. The FBI informed the Gambino family's lawyers that they had the Burgeon tapes. Paul Castellano demanded to hear them. He was the boss. He had the right to know what his captains were saying behind his back. John Gotti was trapped. He knew that once Paul heard those tapes, he would see the drug dealing. He would hear the insults. He would hear Gotti calling him a cowardly old man who was unfit to lead. Gotti knew that in the world of the Cosa Nostra, this was a death sentence. There would be no trial, no appeal, just a car ride to a quiet location. Gotti realized he had two choices. He could wait for the Pope's executioners to come for him, or he could strike first. But there was one man standing in his way. One man who still believed in the old ways, in the sanctity of the boss. Aniello, Mr. Neil Delacroce, was the underboss and the spiritual heart of the Gambino family. He was a man of the old school, a man who believed that you never, ever kill a boss without the permission of the commission. He loved John Gotti like a son, and for years, he was the only thing keeping Gotti's rage in check. But on December 2, 1985, the protection vanished. Neil Delacroce died of cancer in a Manhattan hospital. It was the spark that lit the fuse. In a final, staggering act of arrogance, Paul Castellano did not attend the wake. He did not show up to honor the man who had held his family together for a decade. He claimed he was under surveillance and didn't want to get arrested, but to the soldiers, it was the ultimate disrespect. It was proof that the Pope didn't care about his people. To John Gotti, the message was clear. The bridge was gone, the boss was alone, and the street was hungry. Gotti didn't move alone. He was a master of manipulation. He reached out to other powerful men in the family who were tired of Castellano's corporate ways. He brought in Frank DeSicco, a man Castellano trusted implicitly. He brought in Sammy, the bull Gravano, a cold-blooded killer with a mind for strategy. They met in secret, away from the Bergen Club, away from the FBI bugs. They knew that if the commission, the heads of the other four families, found out, they would all be marked for death. This was a rogue operation. It was a gamble for the highest stakes imaginable. They chose Sparks Steakhouse for a reason. It was Castellano's favorite spot. It was a place where he felt comfortable. They knew his schedule. They knew he would be arriving at dinner time when the streets were crowded with Christmas shoppers. The crowds would provide the cover. The chaos would provide the escape. 5:25 p.m. The hit team is in position. They aren't wearing masks. They are wearing identical uniforms, tan trench coats and Russian-style fur hats. It was a brilliant tactical move. If witnesses saw them, they would all describe the same generic man, making it impossible for the police to pick out individuals. John Gotti and Sammy Gravano are parked just a few yards away, watching through a tinted windshield. Castellano's car pulls up. Thomas Bilotti gets out of the driver's side. He walks around to open the door for the boss. Castellano steps out, adjusting his coat against the New York chill. He never sees the four men moving toward him. 6 shots to the head and chest. The Pope was dead before he hit the ground. Bilotti tried to reach for a weapon, but he was cut down instantly. The gunmen didn't run. They walked calmly into the crowd and disappeared. Gotti and Gravano drove slowly past the bodies, staring down at the man they had just replaced. The coup was complete. The white-collar era was over. The era of the Dapper Don had begun. John Gotti didn't hide in a mansion. He became a superstar. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He walked into courtrooms and walked out a free man 3 times in a row. He was the Teflon Don. But by turning on his own boss, he had broken the one thing that kept the mafia strong: stability. When you show your soldiers that it's okay to kill the king, you ensure that one day they will come for you. Gotti's ego became his own prison. He talked too much in rooms that were bugged. He treated Sammy, the bull Gravano, like a servant instead of a partner. In 1991, the ultimate betrayal came full circle. Sammy Gravano, the man who held the gun for Gotti, became a government witness. He told the FBI everything. He told them about Sparks. He told them about the drug deals. He told them about the lies. John Gotti was sentenced to life without parole. He died in a prison hospital in 2002. The Gambino family, once the most powerful empire in America, was left in ruins. Why did they turn on their own? Because in the underworld, loyalty is a luxury that no one can afford. Paul Castellano was killed because he loved money more than he loved his men. John Gotti was imprisoned because he loved fame more than he loved the rules. The Mafia Vault shows us that when the family becomes a business, the only thing left to trade is blood. The vault is never truly empty. There is always another file, and some are more explosive than others. We've seen what happens when a family turns on its king, but what happens when a single mistake destroys an entire empire? Next time, we go inside the Lucchese family to uncover the moment the walls came crashing down. It wasn't a grand FBI raid or a bloody street war. It was a mistake that took less than 60 seconds. Next file, the single phone call that toppled the Lucchese empire. If you want to be there when we open the Lucchese files, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss how one conversation ended a dynasty. Comment below. Do you think the Mafia's biggest enemy was the law or their own phones? I'll be in the comments.